Hey there, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to take you through a build strategy and a possible blueprint for a max performance 204R and a normal automatic Ford shift pattern strategy. So the use case here is a 1930 Ford Model A hot rod. It is a full custom, one-of-a-kind build, no expense spared. It's got a small block Chevy that's making somewhere in the neighborhood of between 475 and 500 horsepower. It's got a blower on it, and this car is immaculate. So customer wanted to swap out his TH400 so that he can have overdrive and enjoy the vehicle, maybe take it on road trips here and there without, stressing the engine too much when in high gear. So we're going to talk through all the parts that we're going to be installing into this build. We have a good chunk of them coming from Extreme Automatics out of Cincinnati, Ohio. They've been great partners in this build. They put together several parts for us that you'll see here on the bench in a minute. And then I'll take you through things that you need to consider, tips, pointers, and other things that you'd want to have top of mind if you plan on building a similar 204R for a like kind setup, either in your vehicle or if you're new to these transmissions and maybe a customer's vehicle. So we'll get a little bit closer to the bench, walk you through everything, and then we'll kind of summarize and close out from there. Alright, so as mentioned, we have quite a few parts from Extreme Automatics. We've also installed a CK Performance Master Recalibration Kit, and then we also have Alto Red Eagle clutches everywhere in the unit, along with a brand new steel module, including choline steels in the forward and direct clutch. So we'll start here with the super pump. This is Extreme Automatics, a complete ready to drop in pump assembly. It features a hardened heat treated heavy duty stator from Sonex, as well as some of their own proprietary parts, including a high pressure regulator valve spring, Sonex boost and reverse boost valve with O-rings, as well as their in-house pressure relief spring here at this location. So Extreme states that it's very common that they see this particular spring worn, and if that's the case, then the pump will not be able to produce the kind of pressures that it was set up to produce, or at least meet the needs of the rest of the transmission. So this is ready to go, comes with an O-ring, everything that you would need to have installed into the pump. Both surfaces have been completely remachined. It has a Sonex Teflon bushing as well as a new seal, and then the stator shaft itself has a new bushing installed as well. So very easy deal, and I will say a good majority, if not all of their performance parts are very competitively priced for what you're getting. So continuing on down in the same vein, we have their BRC valve body and recalibration kit. So this valve body, I'm almost positive, was milled. Now you can see the milling marks. A little bit of a backstory here to kind of set the table and give you some context. I had rebuilt this transmission, or I should say built it, about 4 months ago. And when we went to install it, the customer was having all kind of problems getting proper line pressure. So we tried 2 different valve bodies, and both of them were found to be no good for various reasons, and we just could not get the pressure signals that we wanted to at an in and full TV. So we kind of made the decision to acquire a BRC valve body, and then the more we talked about it, and some of the things that Extreme makes available on the website that we didn't initially acquire and install into the build, both the customer and I agreed that it would be a good idea to just yank the transmission out and install some of these additional components to make this thing as bulletproof as possible. So we have one of Extreme Automatics billet steel input shafts paired with one of their overdrive planetary carriers that's also billet steel. And this piece in particular is really nice. They brazed all the pinion shafts, completely rebuilt the assembly itself. So you have all new thrust washers here for each of the pinion gears, all new needle bearings, and like I say, a billet housing so that this will not come apart under high RPMs when it's subjected to heavy torque. So pretty much ready to go, a new bushing installed, and this will bulletproof this part of the transmission from failure. So As far as check ball placement in the valve body, so we have 3 check balls installed. This is going to be your 1-2 flow control check ball. So if you're running a really high stall converter, I would say 3000 and above, my suggestion would be to leave this out. That's also going to be dependent upon what else you have going on, but the usual practice is to leave this check ball out, block the 1-2 and the 3-4 accumulator circuits off, and install 4 case check balls in the bathtubs and leave the rest of them out. That's assuming you're running the CK or a similar kit. Okay, this is the billet servo assembly that comes with the CK Performance Master Recount kit. We have it already assembled. So we are also going to be installing a CK Performance billet overdrive ring gear. So this is a common failure point when RPMs and power exceed about maybe 400, 450 or so. And my customer's certainly well above that, so we want to make sure that there's no weak links there. All right, moving on down through the rest of the case. Actually, let me speak real quick about the governor. The governor is also modified per customer requests when it comes to shift points, both part and wide open throttle, by Extreme Automatics as part of their BRC recalibration package. So valve body, governor, and spacer plate. I mean, this is kind of a complex build. Certainly I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as your first try, doing something like this. It'll take some iterations, and what the customer is going to be doing is, once I have this all put back together and it's back in his possession, he's going to be taking it out to California Performance Transmission and having it run on the dyno so they can see exactly where it's shifting, what kind of line pressures are being generated, and to confirm or deny it's behaving itself functionally, and then perhaps maybe do some final tuning, if you will, to get everything set up and dialed in so that when he installs this back into the vehicle, he knows he's 100% good to go with it. So, like I said, a lot of complexity going on. I haven't touched either the pump or the valve body, and I'm not going to. There's no reason to. But suffice to say, these things can be tricky to set up. So if you're in a position to do so and you have access to a dyno, and dyno fees are not that much money, I would strongly recommend you do that. So anyway, didn't mean to get off on a tangent there. Just want to make sure I'm covering everything that I think would be helpful and useful for you to hear. All right, so moving on down through the rest of the case, we have the overdrive apply piston for our overdrive clutch. This is machined to accept an additional friction in the overdrive clutch pack. So 204 Rs from the factory, they only have 2 line plates, 3 steel plates, and a backing plate. So it's very common practice, even on mild builds, to machine this apply piston down, and you're going to machine it roughly 80 thousandths of an inch or so, or the equivalent thickness of 1 overdrive clutch, which I'll give that to you real quick. So exactly 80 thousandths. And that will make that clutch significantly stronger. In a stock application, it's not necessary. But for what we're doing here, or anything performance, I would say it's pretty much mandatory. That's just my opinion. Somebody else that does these all the time may feel differently, and that's certainly okay, but it's something I always do. Alright, so you saw we're running Red Eagle clutches, so we have them in the coast clutch, the overdrive clutch, the forward clutch drum, direct clutch drum, and the low reverse clutch pack. So sparing no expense with the friction material. We're going to pair all those clutches with a wide performance band. Okay, this is an Alto wide band. It's, I believe, Kevlar lined. So again, the idea behind these wide bands for all transmissions that take shifting bands is to cover as much surface area of the drum or whatever it is they're grabbing as much as possible to avoid premature failure due to drum surface warpage. Okay. At the same time, you also have more surface area to grab and hold on to, And so when you're putting something like 500 foot-pounds of torque on a 1-2 wide open throttle shift, you want to make sure that that band is not going to slip on that drum. And a wide band is always going to be better, all other things equal, than a factory spec, otherwise narrow band. Alright, I'm going to move the camera down a little bit so you have a better view of all the rest of the parts on the bench. And we'll start with the center support and move through to the rest of the case in terms of all the components inside. And then I'll just briefly touch on the case itself, and then we'll wrap up. Alright, so you already saw the paper and rubber kit. I mean, that's just pretty much standard on all rebuilds. So we'll pick up with the center support. So this transmission has one of CK Performance's full roller setup. So what that consists of is a rollarized center support, where the support itself was machined to accept the Torrington bearing in place of the 2-tab thrust washer that normally goes here. That will allow for heat mitigation, you know, and also to some extent allow for a little bit more horsepower preservation and you know, passage through the transmission to the drive shaft and rear wheels. But the main reason you want to rollerize as many surfaces as you can that would otherwise have static thrust washers or spacers or what have you is to reduce heat at those locations and to ensure the transmission, you know, functions as it should under high RPMs. So this particular unit has a center support, it has the rollarized low reverse clutch housing, and the rollarized rear ring gear. Those are the components that come in the CK full roller kit. Alright, Teflon sealing rings on the stator for the center support. You're going to leave the middle sealing ring off if you're going to internally dual feed. So this here is going to be your high reverse feed passage. This is the direct clutch feed, the forward clutch feed, and this is overdrive. So this is with the support installed into the case as if you were looking at the case with the case belly face up and the bell housing at 12 o'clock. So anytime you're dealing with an engine making more than about 350 horsepower, it is strongly recommended, strongly advised that you dual feed the direct clutch. Now, here's what you need to know when it comes to dual feeding the direct clutches in these transmissions specifically. This does not apply to things like the TH350, 400, or 4L80E. It applies only really to the 204Rs. And that is that the forward drum and the factory shaft become extremely vulnerable. Okay, extremely vulnerable, especially under big power motors shifting wide open throttle from second to third gear. This shaft, if it was a factory shaft, will a lot of times want to snap in half or break off from the drum. That's obviously no good. So it is strongly recommended that you pair any internal dual feed mod for these units with a forward drum that is equipped with a billet steel input shaft, just like this one from CK Performance. Alright, so as mentioned earlier, we have our Alto Reds. One of the other things that I would also recommend that you do and incorporate into your budget, because they're not that expensive, is the installation of billet aluminum applied pistons for your forward clutch and your direct clutch. So there's a forward clutch piston, there's a direct clutch piston. These came with all the rest of the parts from Extreme Automatics. And one thing I will say when it comes to shipping, some companies do this better than others. Extreme Automatics does an outstanding job when it comes to packing and you know, caring for all of the parts that might be in a package or a box that they're going to be sending to you. In one order, I purchased a super pump, the BRC valve body and governor, these two billet pistons, and that machined overdrive piston along with the billet overdrive planetary carrier. And I have a separate video that I published you know, about a few days or so, maybe a week before the publication date of this video, showing you exactly how they packed everything. And I mean, you could shake that box all day long and you couldn't feel or hear anything moving inside of it. It was rock solid. I mean, unless somebody ran over it with a tank, none of the parts would have been harmed in transit. So that's what you want. So just as a side note, CK Performance also does a really good job packing. I've never ever had any parts come in from them damaged that I had to, have them replaced. So it doesn't sound like a big deal, but part of the build strategy is buying from vendors, suppliers, or whomever that you're getting your parts from that are going to kind of give the level of service and duty to care to parts that they're shipping to you. That's part of the transaction. So not something I hear talked about a lot, but when I evaluate different suppliers, different vendors for whom I'm going to do business with, one of the tests that I run is how well they pack their stuff, and EA passed that with flying colors. So anyway, again, don't mean to get off on a tangent here, but I also want to make sure you have everything that you need to know, at least as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to these and other transmissions, at least generally speaking. So here's our forward clutch pack. So it's a good idea to have an over thick steel, maybe a couple of them on the bench, just so that you can get your clearances. For your forward clutch and your direct clutch, the general best practice is 10 thousandths of clearance per friction disc that you have in the pack. Your coast and your overdrive clutches, they're going to be a little bit different in that regard. Overdrive isn't really regulated per se. I think I've seen anywhere from like maybe 40 to 50 thousandths, 60 thousandths clearance, which is perfectly fine. I'll flash the ATSG manuals clutch clearances on the screen for all of the clutch packs so that you have them handy. I also have a complete rebuild series of the 204R on the channel. And if you're putting together something like this, the only difference between what I show you in that build and what I would do differently procedurally in this build is the handling of the dual feed of the direct clutch. Okay, you install a solid bolt in this location for the center support, and that's the high reverse feed passage. You leave out the center seal, the direct drum, and then of course you leave out that middle sealing ring. You don't see me do that in that build, though I talk about it, but that's really all there is to it. So, like I said, the other major consideration is just to make sure you have a billet steel intermediate shaft in your forward drum. All right, as far as return spring assemblies, again, recommended that you have all of your return springs in the assembly. Some of these transmissions come with direct clutch return spring setups that only have either half or 2/3 of the springs that are available. And what's crappy about that is that GM, for whatever reason, did not produce one return spring cage or base for all of their direct clutch setups for all 204Rs. It would have made sense to do. It would have been more cost efficient for them to do it, but they didn't. And why that's important is that a lot of the return spring assemblies that you're going to come across do not have engagement bosses to snap the springs into. Okay, so the springs would just be floating. I mean, they'd be secured down here, but they wouldn't be secured on the retainer side. So if you're building something for performance and you're working with a core, and chances are it's not going to be a core out of a Grand National or GNX or Monty Supersport because they're just relatively rare, you need to scrutinize the underside of this thing to make sure that it's got mounting locations for every single spring that could go in that assembly if you're doing something high performance. If you're not, then don't worry about it. So just again, one more thing to keep in mind. So here's a direct clutch. Again, we have an over thick steel. So 6 frictions, 6 steels, a backing plate, and a snap ring. You should have somewhere between 60, 65 thousandths, 55 thousandths on the low end. The other thing to make note is the difference between the backing plates and the forward and direct clutch. Okay, the forward clutch backing plate is not as stout. It is not as capable of holding shifting torque as is the direct clutch backing plate. So that's another thing you want to keep in mind. So don't like swap them between the two drums, because I think they'll technically fit. Yeah, they'll fit. in each other's respective housings, but you don't want to swap them. If your direct clutch backing plate's no good, go find a good used one. Don't, get another forward backing plate and stick it in the direct drum, because, under high power, you might regret that. Okay, I'll show you a close-up of the billet pistons. Here they are. I mean, dimensionally, they're identical to the factory pieces. For the direct drum, you had the stamped steel style pistons. According to Extreme Automatics, they are a little more resilient than the forward clutch. The pistons are not as likely to warp or to flex under power, but again, we're not taking any chances, so, these are not that expensive. It just made sense to, make them part of the deal. The forward piston, however, is vulnerable. So high power, high RPM, and more specifically high pressure will cause the stamped sheet steel style piston to flex and warp, and the aluminum factory piston to potentially crack. So for your max performance type builds, you're going to be in that 250 to 275 psi regime. And so the other pistons are not vulnerable, but these two are. And so you're going to want to make sure that you include room in your budget for a set of billet pistons if you're going to be building something for like 500 plus horse. It's just cheap insurance to prevent failures in the forward clutch and direct clutch, especially the forward clutch. All right, here's our low reverse clutch pack, Alto reds, steels, otherwise, nothing unusual. So here is the low reverse piston housing, and the bearings that CK use for this position as well as the rear ring gear are TH350 pump bearings. Okay, so new bushing installed. So readily available TH350 pump bearings. You can find them pretty much at any transmission part supply house, online. I use them in TH400s and 480Es to rollerize the rear case thrust in those units. Pretty common. All right, sun shell and sun gear. So we have a heavy duty sun shell here. Standard practice, standard fare, just like the stator shaft and the pump. Even for stock or mild performance builds, I always upgrade that, the stator shaft and the pump, and then I'll do a recalibration kit for the valve body of some sort. It could be the basic Transgo SK204R, that's a good kit. The CK Performance for more performance-oriented builds, and then for all-out builds, and probably for all my builds, if I continue to do 204Rs going forward, I'm going to be opting for a BRC recalibration package from Extreme Automatics, and probably a super pump as well, because they do all of the work for you. They've done all the homework in terms of what needs to be done to those two parts to make them bulletproof and reliable. All right, rest of the parts and components are pretty much as they were from the factory. Nothing really to focus in on, or stress. I will say you'll have 3 different points of clearance or measurement of travel of case components in this transmission. So you have your rear gear end play, your what I call drum travel or intermediate end play, and then your front end play. And I'll flash the specs on the screen, but for anything performance in the rear, I like to see somewhere between 4 and 7 thousandths. The spec is between 4 and 10. I like to have between 4 and 7. The closer to 4, the better. For your drum travel, I like to see between 15 and 25 thousandths. So for the rear end play, you're going to have a selective spacer, and then there are shims available as well, so that you can dial that end play in to that range that I feel is ideal. Okay, and you'll have your non-selective washer here on the top of the forward ring gear, and then you're going to have your selective thrust washer spacer, and then the shim, and the shim goes underneath the washer, and then you'll have your snap ring that secures itself to the output shaft that comes up through here, and then you just take a dial indicator and you measure the amount of travel of this ring gear against the snap ring and see what that is. So that's how you dial in rear end play. For your intermediate end play, you're going to use a selective washer that goes into the snout of the output shaft, just like this, and that's going to regulate the amount of travel and space available for the forward and direct drums to move between the rear gear set and the back of the center support. And so I like to be at minimum spec there as well. And in the front spec, you're going to use this big 3-lobe thrust washer that goes back onto the stator shaft to set your front end play. And for whatever reason, I'm drawing a blank on the front, but I want to say it's like something like 15 to 30 thousandths. It's similar to a 704 for all 60E, I think. The front end play measurement and movement that takes place between the overdrive carrier assembly input shaft whole deal and the pump have no mechanical relationship with the rest of the case. So you want to make sure that your end play for your drums is greater than the end play for your rear gear train, because those two will thrust against each other in a direct relationship. And if this is, say, 10 thousandths and your drum travels 8 thousandths, you're going to have a bind in the case, and you'll massively overheat the direct clutch. It'll smoke, the forward clutch will be smoked. And I have a build, or not a build, I have a teardown video on the channel at 204R that suffered that fate. Somebody had put, I don't know, I think one of the thinnest selective spacers available in the rear gear at this position here, and then they put one of the thickest intermediate selective spacers on the snout of the input shaft, causing the case to bind. I mean that's what happens, you know, when you don't set that up correctly. So massive overheating. Both clutch packs melted down. The forward clutch or the direct clutch, one of the two, is welded. I think it was the forward clutch. So anytime you have a forward clutch welded, you'll have forward movement in park, neutral, and a bind in reverse. I mean, it's pretty much a dead giveaway if that's what's going on with your transmission. Your forward clutch pack or whatever comes on to give you first gear and drive has welded itself together. And you know, obviously it'll have to come out and be dealt with. All right, I think that covers everything in terms of the case. Well, yeah, you know what? One other thing I need to make mention of, and I didn't because it was sitting there on the pan. That is a billet steel anchor pin for your band. Strongly recommended you put a billet steel anchor pin in for your band so that the factory pin doesn't become dislodged due to aggressive wear and tear owing to the amount of shifting torque that it will otherwise see. So that comes from CK Performance. I believe Extreme Automatics also sells them and makes them available. A filter, and then for the pan itself, customer wanted to have the ability to, you know, drain the fluid and service it without taking a bath in transmission fluid, so we installed a Superior Tech drain plug kit. These can be put on any sheet metal pan. It's a very simple process. You just drill the hole, you have your lock nut, and then you have your gasket with a nut here on the side, and then of course you have the drain plug itself, which I think is 7/16 in terms of socket size, and very similar to the other, like, you know, similar plugs on the transmission, like your line pressure port tap and all that. So it's a Superior Tech product. I'll flash the part number on the screen so you won't have to go rooting for it. All right, so I'll just talk real quick about the case itself. So this particular case had to actually be modified. We had to basically remove the ears, if you will, that were present. That's part of, you know, the normal casting for a 204R case bell housing, and that was so that the transmission itself would fit into the vehicle. Otherwise, there was, you know, those things where causing problems. So they were one here and one over here. They're not there anymore because the customer has a fabricator that he uses, and the fabricator basically lopped them off. I mean, he did a wonderful job. I mean, it looks like it was this way from the factory. All right, you also notice I have a set of these studded fasteners for our torque converter clutch solenoid, and that is because we're going to be running an internal-external lockup kit. It's actually a modified kit that the customer has set up himself so that he can have total control over the converter clutch in fourth gear. Okay, he's also going to be running A&N fittings. I always recommend these two for anything real high performance or really heavy duty, or anybody living in the desert Southwest. I mean, I'm here in Vegas, and as you know, it gets very hot here. So hot, dry, arid climates, it's good to run a little bit larger diameter fittings and flex hosing and all that good stuff. He has paired that with a giant aftermarket transmission cooler to further mitigate any thermal related issues that the transmission may have, especially in the summertime. All right, we have a new vent tube in here. I already have the linkage already installed. I didn't bother taking it out from when I built the transmission a couple of months ago. So, laziness, yes, but also, there's nothing wrong with the selector seal. All right, so this is going to be the high reverse feed passage in the case. That's where you're going to put your solid bolt, and then this will have the factory feed bolt for your overdrive clutch. All right, hopefully this video has been helpful for you. Sorry if I rambled. Just want to say thank you to the customer for the opportunity to, work on this for him and to build it. And we'll be getting this all done and back to him in the next day or so. And also, a big shout out to Extreme Automatics for all of their work that they've done with the pump, the valve body, the input shaft, billet pistons, and so forth. Great quality. Everything looks immaculate. And another big shout out to CK Performance for all the parts that they have provided, and everything fit like a glove. So, all right, guys, if there's anything else you want me to see when it comes to 204Rs, let me know. I'll see if I can prioritize a video. I'll be honest, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be working on these transmissions. The big challenge with them is just simply parts. Depending upon how the industry evolves and, what continues to be available and, what may suddenly not be available will go a long way in determining what I do with respect to building these, especially for performance applications. But for now, we have Extreme Automatics. They've come through quite nicely with these parts. So looking forward to getting this thing together. All right, guys, thanks again for watching. Greatly appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care.